Cell phones are great. They do a lot of things here for a cheap disposable operating system you can carry along. Android works great for that. When it comes to serious computing, you don't really have that portably. Sure, you can browse the web and stuff like that, but as far as running background processes and doing all that other cool stuff you can do with a full Linux operating system, you just don't have that on your ordinary tablets. Well, the solution with that is a Raspberry Pi. A Raspberry Pi can run desktop Linux. It's very similar to the Debian. Raspberry is very similar to Debian, and that's what Raspberry by default runs, and you can get other versions of an operating system to run on a Raspberry. This is going to talk about how to make a tablet out of a Raspberry and therefore be able to carry all of that computing power that you might want out of a Linux desktop and be able to run processes and keep them running and have a windowed environment, be able to have multiple pictures up at the same time and have a background process and all this other stuff. Being able to do all that with a portable system by using a Raspberry Pi to build a tablet. So this thing, as I learned from my experience, I built something similar to this. This was actually a vehicle mount. It was not a tablet. I wish I had thought about this back then and built the tablet version. It would have been great when I came into the truck stops to be able to have the tablet there with me to be able to carry it. This is it would last about 8 hours if it was continuously run, like during a 34-hour restart, and I was just going to run it straight off the battery. I could get a good 8 hours off of a single 20,000 milliamp hour USB power bank. And that's what you're going to use for the rechargeable battery. That's one of the biggest things that makes Raspberry Pi not as portable. That and the peripherals. So part of what we're going to talk about is how to carve down all those peripherals and run it on a portable power source. So that way, it's kind of like a tablet at that point. Alright. Yeah, and you can also just change out the battery. If it's running on a USB power bank, just shut it down, pull out the old power bank, plug in a new one. It's just that simple. So let's take a look at what type of stuff we're going to need to build this first. Of course, you're going to need the Raspberry Pi board. You're going to want some type of container to build this in. You could just straight to use packaging tape and tape it all together. You can tape it over the screen. That's the way I did it with the truck version of this. I had it in some type of thick plastic bag. I think it was something that cables or something like that had come in. And it works just fine. You can touch right through with the plastic. So if you tape over the screen, I did have a crack on my screen at one point. I taped over it. I put it in that plastic. It reads the touches just fine. So, some type of container, but if you really want to get good, you can put it into a watertight container. Get some type of like a Tupperware or Rubbermaid or something like that that's watertight. You'd have to cut out the top of it and make a spot for the screen to seal against that to be able to keep the water out there to where you can still access and see the screen. But it would work pretty well. That could actually be waterproof, so that you could actually maybe even make it to where you could submerge it possibly. Anyway, whatever you decide for the container is up to you. There's a lot of things on here that are going to be variable, but I'm going to show some of the basic concepts on here when I do the examples. Alright, micro smart digital card, and that you're going to need you need a micro smart digital card. That's what the Raspberry Pi boots the operating system off of. It's what it uses for a hard drive. Cables, all your cables that you're going to need. You're going to need a number of, just depends on how you set up your setup. You're going to need a number of USB, and depends on your depends on your Raspberry Pi version. You might need micro USB, you might need USB 3. cables and your screen, whatever else you decide to use. But your cables, make sure you have the right cables for your connections. Your touch screen, that's going to be important for this to really be like a tablet, to use a touch screen. Power supply, whatever you're deciding to use. If this is just a portable computer that you can take to your workplace desktop and you don't really need it to be battery powered, then sure, you might just use the standard what do you call those things, the standard wall plug-ins. That might work for you. But if you want this to be more like a tablet where you can carry it around and use it while you're sitting at places that you might not have an outlet nearby you, well, you might really want to have that USB power bank of some kind. If you can get bigger ones, that might work too. Littler ones, my experience was this type of setup will work for about, I think it was a Raspberry Pi 3 that I used, 3B plus, and it lasted right around 8 hours on a fully charged USB power bank with a 20,000 milliamp hour capacity. So whatever you choose for your power supply just depends on what you're looking for. Just be aware, a lot of those power banks, they will cut the power off abruptly to whatever they're charging, which means your device. And yes, they do work. I used to run them all the time on these these Raspberry Pis can be powered off these power supplies, but not every power supply can power the Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pis use a ton of power, so it needs to be something that is going to supply the draw for the Raspberry Pi. And the image of the operating system. I like Raspberry, but it's up to you which one you want to use. For this purpose, though, we need to make sure that it can log in automatically all the way into the user account if you're using Raspberry. Don't use a light edition. It needs to be able to log into the graphical user interface, because the onboard package is something else that you're going to need to install, and you're not going to be able to log in until you can get in there and launch that onboard package. That's when you're going to have a keyboard. So that's kind of what we're doing here, is we're cutting out a lot of the peripherals that you'd otherwise have to carry. Where just that touch screen is going to be able to be the mouse, because you're able to touch it. With the on-screen package, that becomes your keyboard, and it's your screen. So all that just came into that touch screen with that onboard package. So make sure your operating system logs itself in automatically, and that you have access to the graphical user interface desktop, GUI desktop, and that you put the onboard package on there before you break away from all your other keyboards and whatever else you're working on at your desktop. And of course, you need to have some type of way of writing that image of that operating system onto that MicroSmart digital card. You don't have to commit the micro SD card writer, usually called a reader, but in our case our purpose is to write it, but it's usually just called a reader. Or that could also be a SD card reader that has an adapter for micro SD, which is more common. But you just need to make some way of getting that. If you already get a pre-loaded micro SD card, then you don't have to worry about the micro SD card reader, unless you want it under the additional devices. This is where you're going to come on in here and you're going to say, hey, do you want extra hard drive space? Do you want audio? Do you want speakers hooked up? Do you want a microphone? What all other peripherals do you want on this device? And you're going to want to add those. You've got some extra USB ports, especially considering we've got one going to the screen, and then you've got 3 other ones that you can send them where else you need to. Because we're not hooking up a keyboard, we're not hooking up a mouse, it's all in the screen. So one that goes from the input to the screen, that's your mouse input. All your keyboard's done from there. So you got 3 USB ports on most of these Raspberry Pis. So yeah, you got some room to be able to hook in hard drives, hook in, your speakers can be hooked up to the regular jack for your speakers, but you can hook in a micro USB microphone, or USB drive or even a USB hub. Maybe you want to have extra USB ports on the side that you're going to have them going outside of this box. Whatever you choose. Alright, so let's take a look at the examples here. This is a normal kind of desktop style. You can see where I've got my plugs here. Yeah, I didn't really have a spot to plug it in and power it up, and not like you could really see it on that screen anyway. I have very bad luck getting with my cameras to get anything from a screen to show up on the camera. But this is about the size, just to give us some size ideas. This is about the size of most of your cell phone screens. So it would be a smaller screen to use. This is a very standard Raspberry Pi screen. Over here is the Raspberry Pi, and this really is the size of a normal credit card or driver's license, any of those cards, those 3.5 by 2 inch cards that you carry in your wallet. That's what that is, and it's about 1 inch tall. So that's inside of an enclosure. The enclosure would not come with your box normally unless you bought a kit. So normally it's just going to be the board. It'll work like that. So it's just, you're going to be building this into another box anyway, so you might not even want that box. Here we got the regular keyboard and mouse. So now, one of the other things too that I was going to mention was when I was on the truck, I took this setup and I velcroed it to the dashboard. That's essentially what I did. That way I had access to be able to run programs to find my fuel stops, log my odometer readings, calculate my fuel economy, calculate my routes, find my loads. It was all right here. I had this computing power that was running around out there, so I could just stop wherever I needed to and grab this thing here. So this is that Velcro that I had. I had this on the back of one of my monitors, one of my screens, and I just had that stuck to the dash. This thing here was stuck to the dash. It was already wired up. All I had to do then was take a USB power bank and plug in a screen and plug in this device here, find those two connectors, and just plug them into the USB power bank and run them. Because of the limited amount of time it takes for these things to start up and shut down, if you are careful with how you configure them, this was a very high-speed configuration. I didn't have a lot of services running on there that I did not need. Then I was able to shut this thing down and start it back up in about a minute or so, which meant that I didn't have to run it that much, and that was continuous runtime was 8 hours. So if I kept shutting it down and turn it on whenever I needed to get some information, when I needed to find something, this thing would last me many days of that, many days of running around, sometimes maybe even a week or more. And I don't even think I got around half of, I didn't wait until I was below half of a charge to recharge the thing. So it was something to think about. Also, when you're doing the installation, I do recommend plugging it into wall power, because you don't want to have the installation take too long because you want to do some extra steps and then you don't have enough power to run you all the way through. Because like I mentioned, if you plug in that USB power bank while it's running your Raspberry, you plug that into a wall, many of them will just stop powering your Raspberry, and that's bad on a Raspberry. You don't want to shut them down. You don't want to turn them off without shutting them down, because they can corrupt their file systems. Good thing you can back up the file system pretty well. Just write an image of the Smart Digital card onto a hard drive somewhere else, and then you can just rewrite that image if it gets corrupted. But you have lost your recent work if you did that. Alright, so that was the concept behind the vehicle mount, and you could do that in your house, car, whatever, but just wanted to kind of mention that. So that was industrial strength Velcro, 10-pound capacity. Everything stuck to that pretty well, except for the heavy 20,000 amp hour USB power bank. With the bouncing inside the truck, it would constantly be shaken off the dash, so I learned not to attach it to the dash. I tried all kinds of stuff, but it just, bouncing around in those trucks, it's difficult. Alright, so now let's take a look at what we're really interested in today, right? The tablet configuration. And there's a number of ways to do this, but I just wanted to show, once you take out that screen and that keyboard and all that, this is what you're dealing with here. This thing here could be 1.5 inches tall. Yes, it's going to be a thick tablet. It's not going to be a little, pre-built Android tablet. But for what it's going to do, it's going to be well worth it. You could put the power bank across here, or you can get one of those blocky ones that goes in here, or maybe run both. You could run maybe the screen on the bigger, thicker one that maybe has even more power, because the screen's probably going to use more power, I would think, than the actual device. Or maybe you want to make sure that the device never powers down, so you're going to run it on the stronger one, so that way you'll know you've got a problem when your screen doesn't work anymore. You just have to reroute your screen to the other stronger battery bank and shut down your Raspberry. That would be an option to do. But there's all kinds of things that you can do. But the thing is, I want to show just how small this could be. So you could attach this inside of a box, or even just tape it together with packaging tape would work. And you'd have something you could carry around. You've got a screen with that onboard package, so you've got an on-screen keyboard. That's what that is. That's an on-screen keyboard in that package that works on Linux. So you got a screen, you got a keyboard on your screen, you got the mouse, touch screen capability. Well, right about $200 is what that would probably cost you to build. Now, if you wanted to add a whole bunch of other hard drives and other stuff to it, then yeah, it's going to cost you additional for all that other stuff. But hey, this thing could be portable, powerful. It could really get a lot done. Thank you for watching.